Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Free Thought Forum presented by the Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. I'm your host for tonight, Jacob, and once again, I'm joined by Doug.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, obviously, you're not going to be outside in this weather, so just sit in
Tell me
the air
about it.
conditioning for a while. We got a bit to talk about tonight, variety of things going on, but first we'll mention that this coming Thursday in Mechanicsburg is Jubilee Day, one of the largest events in the area. I think it is the largest event in the area.
At least they advertise that.
Largest one-day event on the East Coast.
Yeah, largest one-day event on the East Coast. A lot of people, lots and lots of people out there. Lots of vendors. This is one of our biggest tables. We usually rent 2 spaces for this. And if you're interested in going, we could definitely use help. And up on your screen should be some of the information of the shuttle buses. You can park away from the event and catch a bus to the event. Down at the, I think I usually park down at the church. It's usually plenty of parking down there. And I don't think it's even that far away from the event if you want to walk it. So,
It's not.
yeah. So usually I don't have an issue with parking, but the day has a website if you want to look on there to see any other parking arrangements. That's being a country boy. The first thing I had to learn growing up is how to deal with limited parking. I had no idea how to deal with that. Yeah, it's just one of those things you don't think about.
Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, too, that this is a live call-in show. We're going to put the phone number up on the screen, so if you have any questions or comments, be sure to give us a call anytime for the next hour or 55 minutes.
But first up tonight, I wanted to talk about the June being Pride Month. You might have noticed on Facebook they now have a new icon, the Pride icon. You can click to respond to posts. It's to just celebrate the LGBT community and be encouraging for people to be out and open about it. And the reason it's in June is it's held to honor the Stonewall Riots, which were in 1969. The Stonewall was a gay bar in New York City. And back then it was actually very common for the police to raid gay bars.
Yeah.
I mean, that was back in the time when if you were found to be a homosexual, you would be shot full of chemicals.
Yeah.
And that back then it was classified as a mental illness. And
any time that the police would go out, they'd check all the public restrooms for homosexual behavior in there. So it was like Big Brother's always watching over you.
right. I mean, it was very extremely intrusive and again, these kind of raids were common, and it's just this time people said enough is enough, and that's when the big fight back started. And within a couple of months, you started seeing gay rights activist groups starting to pop up all over the place, and bit by bit, they're slowly winning. I mean, we still have a bit to go, and we still have to work to protect the progress that's been made, but it's still encouraging to see how far it's come in so little time.
But there's still people out there that do feel the need to remain in the closet just because of their work and various other reasons. So, I mean, don't feel that everyone is out of the closet now. It's there's still the few people left in there.
Right, and it's bit by bit it's becoming more accepted. I mean, when I was a kid, the numbers were like only 30% supported same-sex marriage, and now that number's over 60. But the problem is with prejudice is it usually doesn't go down without a fight. It's usually whenever it's about to, you think you're about to win, it's like all of a sudden it comes roaring back. People for some reason take a much harder stand.
Well, people always feel that they've got to, if they are losing, now is the time. They've got to make a push for it, and even when they're on the wrong side.
Right, and we sometimes talk about that where it's you see a lot of these right wing religious groups. They'll pretty much chuck the entire Bible except for the part where it talks about hating gay people. I should have pulled up a picture of this, but like the classic tattoo of a guy who tattoos the Bible verse that says like don't basically if it's an abomination for a man to lie with a man, but that verse like the very next chapter it forbids tattoos. Yeah, that's one of the classic ones, and really how much they just. It's one of those things. A lot of times, religion is just used to justify what you already believe, because they don't really. Now, I'm not saying that's for everyone, but for a lot of there are definitely a lot of people out there where it's more. You have to wonder, even without the religion, they'd probably still be out there, spreading their own prejudice.
Well, it's surprising how many people that really think that if you say something is true enough times, it becomes true.
Right.
Excuse me.
But I mean, I think, and one of the things that's definitely helped the LGBT community is just being out and open about it, and I think that's obviously what has caused the massive cultural shift over the years. And I know the atheist community in general has been taking from their playbook, where it's really we've learned so much from them, and but that community was the one spearheading and the one taking more and more risks than we ever would.
Yeah.
And it's and they're definitely, a lot of them are reaping the benefits, not quite as much as we still have a long way to go, but and unfortunately last year we saw one of the worst examples of the prejudice that still exists in the Pulse nightclub shooting.
Yeah.
The worst mass shooting in U.S. history, and one of the worst single day losses of life I should say single day loss of civilian life. And it just reminds you to be on guard.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not over.
Right.
You always have to be vigilant.
Right.
Because it's the worst so far, but I mean it could tomorrow or the next day and the next month have more casualties when another nutcase is going to try the same thing.
Right. And unfortunately, it's just I remember one time sitting and talking to my brother's father-in-law, and he talked about the way that homosexuals are treated in countries under Sharia law. Mm. But the way he talked about it, I could hear a hint of envy in his voice. Like,
oh yeah, oh that's interesting.
Yeah, it was just sort of like there was definitely an overtone of envy to the way he was talking about it. He wasn't condemning it. He was like, why are we treating them this good here when over here in these countries they're treated like this?
They'll stone them and
running them out of the country, etc. And I'm like, no, I mean, unfortunately, back then I really was unsure of where I was at, so I didn't say anything about it. But I think if we were to have that same conversation today, it would not end well. I would definitely be getting up in his face about it.
If you decided to take someone's side, then that automatically made you gay.
Yeah, everybody. Well, let me put it this way: I'm 33 years old and single. Everybody already thinks I'm gay.
Yeah.
But and I don't even care anymore, because I do have some bisexual tendencies. I haven't. There's. I'm trying to think of what I can actually say on air, but there's I don't care what people think about my sexuality anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm bisexual. Every time I want sex, I have to buy it. So, ta-da.
Anyway.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's the thing to think about is there are a lot more bisexual people than you think.
Oh, craps, yeah.
And mostly because sexual orientation exists on a spectrum. There are people who are exclusively one or the other, but there's a lot of in between of what you sort of tend towards. And I think that's part of the problem is people want a nice clean either or dichotomy, but a lot of things are not that way. Whether it's sexuality, gender, and it's just a lot of different things that,
and all the emotions that are mixed in with it.
Right.
I know a person who he said he was not gay, but he would seek out other gay men for favors.
Right.
But he wasn't gay. It was just sex.
Right. Oh.
It had nothing to do with love or relationships.
Okay.
It was strictly sex. So
Okay.
therefore, he figured, okay, I'm not gay.
Well, I think part of it is just letting people just discover and be who they are, rather than trying to cram themselves into a mold.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best you can do for people sometimes, is just let them be themselves. If it's not hurting anybody else, if it makes them happy, just roll with it. And then there's some people get so caught up in labels they kind of overlook the actual issues.
Yeah.
Where they want to force themselves into one label or the other, and for the most part, I just don't care about labels anymore. It's like sometimes it does help to talk in definitions and not labels. But and I think there's a lot of people in the atheist community who are very very much behind the LGBT community, because we see a lot of the problems they're facing as separation of church and state issues, where it's the religious right wants to impose their own moral code for no other reason than that's what the Bible tells them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them will blatantly admit that. It's weird when you look through apologetics where they talk about, when it comes time to talk about gay people, it's like, is the Bible outdated when it comes to this? And they make no attempt to actually answer that question. They'll just say, well, the Bible still says that.
Yeah. Well, they ask the question, they repeat the question, but they never offer an answer.
Yeah. So, but that's going on all this month. So, if you see on Facebook a lot on Facebook, that's why. Another thing I want to talk about is, as obviously as in the atheist community, we tend to pay a lot of attention to science and trying to make the world a better place here and now, and not just assume that God is going to come back and fix it all. Which is why a lot of us were really disappointed to see the President Trump announce from the Paris climate deal.
Yeah. Paris
and
Accord.
What's extremely frustrating for me, it really didn't surprise me at all. But what really aggravated me about it was how much misinformation is being spread. He stands up there and calls other people fake news whenever he sits there and spreads so much falsehood about some of these issues. And I think first and foremost was what the Paris climate deal actually was. everyone was, a lot of people were making this out to be some sort of international law that the United States had no choice but to comply with.
Yeah, that's
which is not
too
all.
false.
It
Yeah.
was. It carried the weight of a non-binding resolution.
Yeah,
That's all it was. It was a non-binding resolution where everybody got together, made their own pledges, posted their
yeah.
own goals.
This is what we'll do, but no one had a gun to your head.
Right, right, and that's so. It was a piece of international diplomacy. So that's why it fell straight to the president. And the thing that really aggravated me was how Trump portrayed it as if it was an international conspiracy to ruin the U.S. economy.
Well, a lot of it, according to Trump, had to do with our economy, and that we, as the United States, were actually paying the biggest share of it. Now, if that were the case, I could say, well, okay, maybe he's got a point there, but how do you know that really is true? Are we really paying?
It's a lot more complicated than that, and there's also the issue where we're one of the biggest polluters per capita. Even though Trump tried to say that he tried to say we're one of the cleanest nations, when no, we're not.
No,
not even close. But there was like certain things where, but even other countries have been definitely stepping it up more and more as we go moving forward. For example, China is planning to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in clean energy, and canceled plans for about 100 coal power plants. They're going to be abandoning coal soon too, as well. And really, climate policies don't hurt the economy as much as people think they do. I remember when the EPA was first forming, everybody thought that was going to be the end of the economy. But actually, keeping a clean environment can create a lot of jobs in the long run. You pretty much the fishing industry just depends on clean water. Any riverfront businesses depend on a clean environment. And if you're around a heavy polluter, that's going to drive away businesses all over the place.
Most definitely.
So maybe you'll inhibit a job here or there, but if you look at the whole, it can actually be, it can actually be
beneficial.
It can be a good engine for the economy. And if you look at the future is not in coal, no matter how much Trump is trying to say that.
Yeah.
It's like, to him to keep insisting that we bring back coal is almost like insisting that we bring back
horses. Horses instead of cars.
Yeah, horses instead of cars, or like, whatever happened to those photo developing kiosks? We need to bring those back. Let's end video streaming and bring back Blockbuster. I don't know. It's just, and I say as a younger generation, that's kind of frustrating for me because people tend to blame us for when an old business goes down because it didn't keep up with the times. But it's like we're changing times. Businesses are always have to keep up with that, or go out of business.
Well, as much as I hated to see sort of Blockbuster go out of business, hey, our future, our technology surpassed it.
Yeah, and they were the ones who made the mistake not to go to streaming.
Yeah,
they had the opportunity to do it and they didn't do it. And actually, if you look at a lot of these businesses that have gone out lately, they took a wrong turn. Like they didn't jump on when the option was on the table and they didn't take it. But that's the thing. And coal. I think things with coal is even worse because there's so many better options today. And not even just clean energy, but things like oil and natural gas are actually better in many respects than coal. So it's like coal is a dying industry and it should be left to die. And and it's a very, very high pollutant in many ways. Not just in burning it. Like burning it, it's way worse. It's already worse than natural gas or oil. But mining coal is you create a lot of toxic byproducts. I mean, you do for oil and natural gas as well, but it's even worse for mines. I mean, before they put restrictions on that, it used to kill rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not hyperbole either. It literally killed entire rivers.
And just looking at some old photographs of some of the coal-fired furnaces they had, it was belching this black and grey smoke. And then people, like they still do in China now, they have to go around wearing a cloth mask or filter. And I can remember way back when, like Newark, New Jersey, Newark Airport, like that. A lot of the times the smog would almost close the airport.
Right.
And then now they're slowly starting to clean up the air. Well, hey, I like that. I like the fact that I don't have to start coughing if I'm going to...
My grandmother lived in Pittsburgh during the height of steel production.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying you couldn't hang your clothes out for very long or they'd get dirty again. And, I mean, even if we don't go back that far, going back to just a couple years ago where it was still, it was still killing off a lot of the environment which we depended on, which many of our industries actually depended on, again. So to suggest that this is, and the idea that it was just like everybody was just out to get us is, I knew he was xenophobic, but I didn't realize it went this far.
Mm-hmm.
To think that the entire rest of the world is out to get us like this is what he's out there saying.
Yeah.
Is baffling. And it's bad when the president says something and you find yourself thinking, that sounds like something Glenn Beck would say. Literally.
Yeah.
I had that thought where I was like, that sounds like something Glenn Beck would say. And I'm like, oh, really? And now he's the president. But and really, the thing is every nation, almost every nation entered into it. It's, and made some sort of pledge. Yeah, I'll get to that. But everybody made some sort of pledge. It wasn't all the same pledges to make, but everybody made some sort of commitment to do a little better.
We will do what we can do, as much as we can do.
There was only 2 nations that actually didn't enter the agreement. One was Nicaragua, but that's because they didn't think the agreement was binding enough and didn't think it was strict enough. And they're on pace to, I think, be 90% renewable energy by the year 2020. So it's like they're kind of showing everybody else up. Like, we don't even need you guys to be good on the environment. We're already about there. And the other country was Syria, which for obvious reasons, they're in the middle of a civil war, which
kind of negates everything.
Yeah,
they're trying to stay alive.
Yeah, they're just trying to stay alive. But again, it's like you have so many foreign countries who are making large strides to cut down on emissions. And I think even the president of France came out and said, for any climate scientist, clean energy scientists, anybody in that field, we'll find a job for you here. Is what they came out and said. But it kind of reminds me. I heard after the election, there were a lot of climate scientists in the United States that started backing up their data. It's just to be on the safe side. But there is some encouragement out of this. A lot of companies and cities will still attempt to comply with what the United States had pledged to do. Many of the companies these companies are not companies in the clean energy business either. They're just, companies that care about it. Companies like Walmart and Philip Morris, which you wonder what world we live in that those guys have suddenly become the good guys. But yeah, it's and a lot of cities have said the same thing, where they're gonna stick to the original commitments, including most notably Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Because Trump had made the comment, I serve the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. And Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh mayor came out and go, no, we're still going to go along with this.
Yeah.
And sticking to the agreement isn't about Paris anyway. That just happens to be where the convention
was held. Yeah.
Yeah,
and where the agreements were signed.
Yeah. And the thing is he comes at this with the idea that it's all about just watching over American interests. But the thing is if you think you can watch out for American interests just here alone, you can't do that, because everything's intertwined.
And the American interest really isn't just America. I mean, if you really turn around and say, well, screw everyone else, we're just going to watch out for ourselves. Well, yes, of course you want to watch out for yourselves, for your own economy, and everything like that. But you don't have to screw everyone else in the world to put America first.
And there are times when you could have actually saved a lot of headaches in the long run. Like, if you help a foreign nation, you might not get a refugee crisis on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't mean to make that as a big point about Syria, because when that broke out, we didn't know quite what to do with that. And that's more of an issue in hindsight. But there have been other incidences since then where we've given aid to a country just mostly so we wouldn't have another massive refugee crisis on our hand. What's that?
The Monroe Doctrine after World War II dealt with that exact thing, where they had to help rebuild Europe, and Europe became a very strong ally for even up to now.
Right.
Maybe
So
not Trump's ally, but
U.S.
ally.
So yeah, I mean, helping foreign countries can sometimes come back around and help us in the long run. So it requires a lot more complex thinking and forward thinking. And the other thing I would say is, like, we as individuals can always do what we can to do better. I'm taking steps of my own to see how much waste I can cut, maybe helping out at recycling days, etc., just to do a little better on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is encouraging to see everybody to move on, even without the federal government behind. Now, it would help. It would certainly help if the federal government was behind it, but obviously we just have to do what we can.
Well, there's a lot of things that would be better off if the federal government wasn't behind, too. So,
yeah. Although sometimes you have to realize I know my thoughts about the government sometimes is people want to. Sometimes it gets a little to the point where we feel like it's just out there somewhere as its own entity, but I think you also have to consider it sometimes as just a way to collectively get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to come together collectively to be able to do something and codify it as much as possible.
And sometimes we have to come together even when things that we don't necessarily like.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that. But a couple other things I wanted to talk about. As at Pennsylvania Non-Believers, we're a supporter of the atheists in Ireland and all these church-state separation issues that they face over there. And as we mentioned in a previous, in one of the last episodes, there was the blasphemy case against Stephen Fry that was eventually dropped when it turned out nobody really cared, and most people didn't even know that law was on the books. But there's another developing case which involved an Irish soccer player who tried to get married using a humanist officiant, which currently Ireland law forbid. So he sued the government and won. Now it's being appealed by their attorney general. But it'll be interesting to see how that case plays out, because that's another law that people may not have been aware of, and once they see it and see it as they're trying to defend it, you might be able to see a little bit more progress with people, some more pushback against these sort of laws.
Well, I mean, religion is always trying to push its way into the morals of society, or what they consider the morals. What is the morality of society?
Yeah, but that's about all I have. Do you have anything you want to go to?
Yeah, you listen to the TV a lot, and you hear statements like the Russians are responsible for this. Oh yes, the North Koreans are responsible. The Chinese. But who are the Russians? Who are the Chinese? When you say, oh yeah, the Russians are responsible for election hacking, do you mean that every single person in Russia is responsible for that? I mean, are you including the whole country, the whole population, when you say the Russians or the Chinese or the Americans? So much of what we see on the news and we read in the newspapers are misleading.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's trying to portray some giant conspiracy. Well, I can assure you that, most of the people in Russia, for instance, really don't give a damn about what is going on here. You know, they don't want to see a war start. They don't want to see a nuclear war, especially, but
or just at least passing interest.
Yeah, and all the pizza stores in Russia or in Moscow, they're not angry at all the pizzerias that are here in the United States. But you listen to the news and you always sound as though everyone in the country is opposed to everyone else in the other countries. And most are not. We don't give a damn.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think unfortunately that's just the way we're used to talking about it.
Yeah.
But we don't think about it sometimes, and unfortunately sometimes when you try to call out people on that sort of language, they get upset and you're like, oh, you're just being oversensitive, or SJW or politically correct stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But really it can be, I think it is important to call it out, because if you get used to talking like that, it's just sort of instills prejudice passively. And a lot of people don't really intend to do that. And that's the problem, is there's a lot of prejudice that's unintentional. We don't realize what we're doing or saying until somebody points it out to us, unfortunately. But I think it is important to watch how we talk about things.
Yeah. Well, it's like saying the gays or the bisexuals. I mean, it sort of includes everyone in your thinking.
Yeah. And that's one of the things you mentioned. You mentioned North Korea. Most of that is just the upper tier in the dictatorship doing all of that.
Yeah.
I really feel horrible for the people of North Korea. They have suffered so much, and we're just starting. Now there's a few people who have finally gotten away from North Korea and are starting to tell their story, and it's just horrifying. I saw a video online the other day where it was a little girl who, I think she's kind of mid to late teens now, but one night they left in the middle of the night to escape North Korea, had to run through China because China would have sent them back, and they literally brought knives with them for the purpose of killing themselves if they got caught. Most of the countries without power, there's no internet. You can get publicly executed for watching a movie, and you can't,
or reading a book.
Yeah, that's or one that's not
approved,
pro government propaganda. And they talk about how you almost think they can read your mind. With how much they're always on top of you, and there's public executions of anybody who even lets it slip out any sort of questions the government at all. So it's and it is a form of mind control, really.
Yeah, most definitely.
So it's so some of the people in these places, you really feel sorry for them.
The just on another subject I listened to on the news, they were saying that that NASA is going to be launching they're called the Parker Solar Probe, that's going to detect weather in space and around the sun. You can see it's if you can see this one, try the next picture, if you would. But it's going to be in orbit around the sun. And you think, gosh, I mean, this thing is just about down in the atmosphere, and it makes me wonder how long this cotton-picking thing is going to last, in that kind of environment. But it has a lot of instrumentation on board the thing that is going to tell us a lot about solar flares that affect our communication satellites and communications on Earth, as well as in the space stations. Because when one of these solar storms comes into being, or is throwing mass coronal ejections from the sun, people that are in the International Space Station, that's a danger for them. Yeah. And also, if anyone, they're talking now about, we're going to send all these people to Mars. Well, it sounds, really, really great. It's just like Columbus setting sail. But it was a tad more dangerous than Columbus. Well, maybe not, I don't know. But either way, now they're making it sound like, we can have tourists going to Mars. Well, can you imagine like a 9-month long trip to Mars in in zero gravity.
Yeah, they have all sorts of things they can do to kind of offset the effects of living in zero gravity.
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of workouts and.
Yeah, technologically, they're not there yet. But it'd be curious to see just how long it is before they solve the majority of the problems.
Well, I think one of the issues with at least the first generation of Mars explorers is how do you get something back off the surface of Mars?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the major delays, and you might end up seeing like the first few people sent out there aren't coming back.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it might sound horrible, but actually, if you think about it, that's no different than the early explorers of the Earth. Or like the new colonists. They were like packed up, left everything that they had behind to go to a new place, and never thought about going back.
Oh, heck! When I was a teenager, like that, and in my 20s, if NASA had said to me, "Hey, we need a volunteer, but it's going to be a one-way trip," I would have said, Yeah, me, here, take me. I don't care. I just want to be out there. It was it's mind-boggling, like that. I wouldn't want to go right now. I think it's a lot more dangerous now than I seem to think it was back when I was a teenager and read all these wonderful science fiction stories about how we would just launch from the Earth and go to Mars. And, of course, back then there's still thoughts that there was going to be life on Mars, but then we're just going to fly back to Earth. Maybe land on Earth. Maybe we'll go into an orbit around the Earth and land later. But it's left so much to the imagination, and unfortunately, a lot of the facts about and the dangers about space travel just kind of got overlooked.
Yeah. Well, at least a lot of the movies out of that time frame made good Mystery Science Theater episodes.
Yeah, oh yeah, God, I missed that program. That was really good.
It's on Netflix now.
Yeah.
It's Mystery Science Theater is a show where they show old bad movies and heckle them.
Yeah.
Typically sci-fi, sometimes other movies like. There's this one episode on the newer episodes where they did a Christmas movie, and it was probably the worst Christmas movie I've ever seen, and I think that's saying something. Literally, I could not sit through it in one sitting. I had to take a break at one point because I'm like, this is just bad. But yeah, it's kind of funny when you watch some of the old sci-fi movies and what they thought space travel was going to be.
Yeah.
Like I remember this one movie where these people had to stand on this one rack of some sort, and their hands get sucked to this pole, and the person says, "Oh yes, that's magnetic," and they're like, "Are their hands made of metal?"
Yeah,
like
it's the iron in their blood.
Yeah, it's like they didn't know how magnets worked. Or other, yeah. There's like various other shows, other movies where it's like they didn't understand how basic science worked, and some of these, and you could tell at the time of the making of the movie that these things just started to be discovered, and the movie makers had no idea what they were.
Oh, the old sci-fi movies are really a hoot to watch now, yeah. And you can see all the mistakes that they make, and you're come on.
Yeah. And, well, I mean, even in Star Trek, every time they say the word quantum, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You know, they're like, quantum singularity. Is that even really a thing?
Yeah, I mean, mathematically speaking, they'd say, oh, yeah, well, on mathematically, they could say that it's a quantum singularity, but...
Well, from what I've heard in the Star Trek script writing, sometimes they just leave a spot. The writers will just leave a spot that says technical babble and then move on and then have somebody fill that
Yeah.
in later. But yeah, I mean, even Star Trek episodes we'll probably look back on at some point and start making fun of. Well, I mean, some of them we already do. Especially the first season of Next Generation.
Yes.
We pretend that doesn't exist.
Hey, I got a question for you people out there. Yeah, there it is, the Mystery Theater. What was it? A few weeks ago, there was this big uproar over this little promo that was put on by Kathy Griffin, the comedian, and basically what they did was that they said that she held up a bloody head by the hair of a likeness of Trump. But every time you saw it on the news, they blurred it out. And I kept on thinking, gosh, this has got to be terrible. And I watched it for a couple of days, and whenever they put it on, they would pixelate it, or they would just blur it. So I never, ever saw what it was she was holding up. So I think it was a week or so later, I was watching some show at about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Do you want me to put it up?
Yeah, you got it?
Yeah.
About 2 o'clock in the morning, and they showed it actually unedited. Now, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't really call that a likeness of the president. I can see a little bit of resemblance where they...
Like a caricature.
A caricature. But why did they think that it was necessary to protect the population that was that was watching the news, and protect them from such a horrible thing?
It's always it's always a running debate with censorship, is where do you draw lines?
Yeah.
And it's a complicated issue.
Well, look at they're putting Julius Caesar now. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is running on, I think it's off Broadway or on Broadway, and where they stabbed Julius Caesar, they've got a person in a suit that looks just like Trump. And they go, no, this is absolutely horrendously in bad taste. Well, half of jokes and things made nowadays are in bad taste.
Well, I think there are still some lines, like, I don't think you should be going out and inciting violence against specific people like that. I mean, it is a complex issue, but I think I don't think, like, you don't want to lose the moral high ground in some of these issues. I think it's part of it too. Now, how that relates, although that was more on a personal level, where that relates to censorship, I think it's more or less you always have to be careful that you don't fan the wrong flames.
Yeah.
You want to get people passionate about what they feel, but let's not get jumped to a point where we're inciting violence or
Yeah.
sort of normalizing the thought of killing a leader.
Audience, what do you think? Is it like a freedom of speech, freedom of expression, or should there be a limit on artistic expression there? But still, nevertheless, what they put as artistic expression does have a message to it. Like you say, they're killing the president.
Yeah.
And it puts all these ideas into people's heads.
Well, and I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind here. When we talk about freedom of speech, ultimately it's the constitutional amendment only applies to what the government can and cannot do.
Yeah.
Anybody who has a media platform has the right to decide what they will and will not show. Now, that being said, obviously things are policed by the FCC. That's a whole different debate. It's whether or not the FCC should be rightfully censoring people is. I think it's debatable whether or not that does sway with the Constitution. I think it really doesn't. But again, that's like for the people who like in the terms of the media is allowed to control what they do and do not show.
Mm-hmm.
And any outlet like that, they have that right. And I think a lot of people get confused by that, especially when you get on the social media platforms, where the people who run the websites have the right to ban people for whatever the reason they want. It's ultimately their website, and if you don't
if you don't like it, well,
yeah, and so it's a bit more complicated in that respect, and I think there's also. Yeah, and then there's also, what kind of viewing audience do you want to make it for, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think there's always the distinction between the moral issues or legal issues, and which is which. That's the thing when we always talk about freedom of speech is. Well, are we talking about, am I morally opposed to this speech or legally opposed? Because
there's a
those
difference.
are two different things.
Okay, so how about patriotic hacking into our elections by Russia? That was what Putin was saying. It was while his government didn't approve of hacking into the American election systems, he thought that some patriotic patriots were hacking. So it wasn't the government; they were just patriotic Russians that were doing it. Well, what happens if it was reversed and we tried to affect their elections, as they were, whatever they are? Would they? Could we just say that it was patriotic Americans that were just trying to upset the Russian elections?
Well, unfortunately, we can't really talk like that because we have gotten involved in way too many foreign elections, and it wasn't just patriotic Americans; it was coming straight from the Pentagon and the White House. So that's why it's really difficult for me to get too emotionally invested in the hacking, because I'm like, for us to complain about a foreign power meddling in an election is kind of really hypocritical of Americans. Mm-hmm. I would like to know, and I would like to get to the bottom of what happened, and for those who were involved to be called out on what they did and potentially face charges. But still, I don't know, I feel like I can't really get too up in arms over it, just because of how much meddling we've done overseas. It's maybe it is about time we got a taste of our own medicine.
Yeah. Say, I remember back in the 60s and 70s where everyone was touting nuclear energy. And everyone said that we've got these nuclear power plants like 3 Mile Island, and that electricity is going to be so cheap to manufacture back there that they could almost give it away. And now things all of a sudden have changed. Do you see where they're talking about closing 3 Mile Island because no one wanted to pay for the cost. No one bid for the electricity that they can produce.
That's mostly because of the natural gas boom.
Yeah.
Where that's been even cheaper, and not only that, they've got so much drilling going on. They've got a huge supply of it now.
Yeah. And just for one last thing, you heard about the thing on London Bridge, and the terror attack, I guess you could call it, there. But does anyone know what London Bridge was? That's Tower Bridge. Yet so many people think that is London Bridge. It's not. It's Tower Bridge. The original London Bridge is actually sitting in Oklahoma, where this gentleman thought that he was buying London Bridge, which was just a stone bridge. Throw the two of them up there, if you would. One is just a long stone bridge, and they said that we're going to put the London Bridge up for sale. And this entrepreneur in Arizona thought that he was actually getting Tower Bridge. So he bought it for, I don't know how many paltry millions of dollars, and they disassembled it stone by stone and shipped it over there to Arizona and reassembled it. But it wasn't exactly what the heck he thought that it was. So, gotcha. But London Bridge, it's still been rebuilt, and it's still being used today. They used to have a song going, London Bridge is falling down, falling down. Well, since it was first built in like the 1600s, it's been reconstructed I don't know how many times because it's falling apart. So, don't get the two confused when you talk about London Bridge and you talk about Tower Bridge. So anyway, I guess that our time here is coming to an end, and we thank you all for tuning in. Is there anything else
I can cover in a minute?
Okay, so we're glad that you tuned in, and don't forget, if you want to do some patriotic hacking, feel free to do so.
Yeah.
Take care, my friends.
Don't forget to come visit us on this Thursday in Chambersburg for Jubilee Day.
We will be there, and even if we're square, we'll still be there.